Do you ever feel stuck? The alarm goes off and you think, is this really my life? Do you wish you could douse your relationships or your career or even your business with rocket fuel and throw a match on it? End the blah once and for all. They either launch or they burn up and you get to start over. I've been there and I see you. I'm Ben Walters, an entrepreneur, pastor, coach, and consultant. If you're ready to get unstuck and ignite your super pumped life or business, I'll give you the rocket fuel and the match. All you have to do is light it. Anybody can lead in good times, but great leaders shine in the darkest moments. Our guest today was tasked by none other than the very President of the United States to get Wall Street up and running 6 days after the 9/11 terrorist attacks obliterated Lower Manhattan. Today, you'll learn how preparedness, trust, and teamwork helped his team accomplish a complex project in 6 days that would normally take years to plan and execute. Listen on to hear the untold story of rebuilding communication infrastructure to reopen Wall Street and to help our nation move forward after the 9/11 tragedy. Welcome, Glenn.
Hey, Ben, how are you this morning?
I'm good. So you were at Logan Airport on that fateful day. You were planning to fly and then you ended up on a conference call and missed a flight. And then tell me, kind of pick it up from there. What kind of was transpiring as you were seeing it go down live and just your perspective on that?
Well, I was on a scheduled plane, which was a little bit later in that morning. So I had scheduled a conference call at the airport and I was, sitting there with my coffee. And when all of a sudden I got an alert on my phone that we had a network problem in New York City. And which is not unusual, other than I got it then when they were a major event. So I clicked off to find out what was going on with that and found out that there was some type of an event that was going on in one of the towers. By that time.
So were you seeing that on the monitors there at Logan?
No, not
were
really.
People aware yet? No.
No, the first alert was just our internal network alarms.
Okay.
And their threshold, so different levels of the business got notified at certain degrees of outage, if you will, on a negative sign. You got it. Bringing technology current. So that was a signal. And then shortly thereafter, you tell the sense in the airport by the airport workers and all the attendants. Everybody was in a phase of what's going on. What are we going to do? And flights start to be delayed. And so, that process was going on. And I knew I was going to be on a plane to get to where I needed to go. So the experienced traveler in me said, get out of there, get back to work. So before the crowd rushes. So I headed back to my office in Boston. And during that time, of course, now the news is caught up and you're listening to it and you realize people are realizing that a plane flew into the tower. And shortly after I get back to my office, because it wasn't that far, the second plane hit. So the time frame was, then it was clear what was happening. And of course, our network goes further than that. It wasn't just Manhattan. We also had the Pentagon. And wherever that other plane was heading was also going to hit someplace that would impact our network. So our higher level thought process started to say, this isn't just one outage. We might have multiple problems.
Yeah, this is a major problem. Yeah, I was looking at the scope of, I did a little research last night and I was just, the magnitude of this was enormous. I mean, you talked about what happened in Lower Manhattan, but then also the Pentagon. And then, there were some communication problems with first responders. And just in New York, though, you lost a switching station critical to Lower Manhattan. You lost 4.5 million data circuits, 300,000 voice lines, 14,000 businesses lost service, 20,000 residential, fiber optic cables under the towers are damaged. I mean, this was a major. So you're processing all that from Boston, but you need to get to New York. So tell me about how the company then sent a car to you in Boston to drive you to New York because the airspace had been closed. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, everything then becomes in the hands of our federal law enforcement.
Sure.
And, when they had F-15s flying over, we had the sensitivity level of travel and openness. So, and I think what's important in running any business is that every single person has the urge to get their hands in and start doing something.
Uh-huh.
And the sensitivity of crisis management is a practice skill. It's not just learned by, everybody has a natural skill in it. But if it's practice, there's a process that clicks in. And the process forces inside that definition a set of common sense, patient decision-making, questions to be answered, and decisions to be made. Doesn't take a long time, but it places that little cloud of calm down for a second.
Okay.
Don't grab the hot biscuit until you know that you can handle it,
Right.
So that's
so you're processing all this as just an individual, seeing what's going on there, and Verizon's telling you, we need you in New York.
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay.
Not yet. No, because now they're in New York. They're in the crisis center.
Okay.
So the goal is you can run into the fire, but if you don't know where you're going and what you're doing, you're in trouble. So I just checked in quickly that day that I'm here, I'm ready, and I can get there. You tell me what you want me to do to my bosses and to the senior level manager.
Sure.
And so, because basically that's it. I mean, remotely we could do the business.
Okay.
You could start the funnel, but you had to get a better picture of the scope. So I stayed at home that night. Later that night, we decided that I was going to go to New York City, packed the bag, and got a car. And the car drivers picked me up, took me in, and they had all the right credentials so I could scoot in. That was strange, driving through Connecticut and New York, and there's no cars in the traffic, and no beeping, no noise, no beeping. No, the most significant thing was that New York City without a horn blowing.
Wow, that is significant.
So
it's eerie.
It was very eerie.
Yeah.
So I got in late that night and checked into a hotel, and the next morning went to the command center and had an executive session to decide the what and the where. And that was I didn't go to the ground zero site then. I went to the next day because it was a crime scene. And we were still looking for people and equipment. So, and we used that time to sit there and figure out how are we going to evaluate what the problem was. Not just rushing to get it done. But our building, if people Google, when you see the pictures of the typical one is there's a big stone face building with a big American flag on it. That was our central office.
Okay.
And so if you drove up to it, you would see a building with one side of it ripped open with steel girders running through it like somebody shot an arrow through it.
Wow.
The windows blown out. We had some of our equipment hanging out of the building. And was, again, a memory is that some of it was still working. The lights were on and people were communicating. So, you get this image. And I think...
so initially you're trying to assess, like, even though there's damage, what's working, what's not. I mean,
it even forces out of the process of saying, how do you begin an assessment when you don't know if it's even a safe environment?
Right.
So on a higher level, a lot of what I'm going to share is kind of in the hindsight thinking. One of the key elements was, which my role started to become was, well, what if this fails? What if we can't bring it up?
Right. So did you personally, did you have to wear PPE, like respirator and on site and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah. Okay. And we didn't get that rolling until like the second or third day, because again, it's a crime scene.
Sure.
It was so massive that everyone was anxious to get in there, but you can't. You have to hold yourself back. it was a little bit of
so were
the best way I could describe the scene, just to kind of move off it, is total lack of sound. A smell that you don't forget. It was like if you could imagine a battlefield the next day. So it's not, there wasn't the noise and the activity and people running and all of that. It's that's the scene. And I'm sure there were thousands of stories of individuals who did unbelievable tasks that day. But those are for those people to know. All I did was what I was asked to do. There was no hero here. It was just take your experience. This is your job. This is your function of the network. This is what we need you to do. And to manage in that process. And about once the reconstruction process began, I was put on a team that what if we couldn't? And it was try to get ahead of, say, if we can't bring this office back, or if we can't make that critical network loop work, what are we going to do? And let's start planning after that fails. So it was like a side effort. You might call it a plan B.
Do you know who set the goal to have Wall Street back up and running that following Monday, September 17th, which was 6 days after the attack? Was that President Bush? The president said that. Okay. And to give context to the listeners, given the scope of what you were trying to rebuild in terms of network capability and data and voice in order to accomplish that goal, if you were planning just in normal circumstances, how long would that have been? Would that have been a year, 2 years? How long a process would you have, under normal circumstances, used to do that?
Well, that's a complex. If it was a clean plate, and you were going to set up your dish perfectly with no roadblocks in the way and all the equipment on time and in place, to set up Wall Street with probably 35 major sites and then all the sub sites, couple of, as I used to say, because everyone used to chuckle about who was in the top 100. We had a couple of thousand top 100 companies, all focused there. And by the way, Ben, they just went through the same disaster, so they're in their emergency recovery plan too. Some of them are moving their data centers.
Yeah.
So they weren't going to go back in the same place because they couldn't. Right. So we needed to know where they were going to bring them back up as well. So you get this. It was a growing tree of challenges to accomplish. And I think one of the critical elements was, and again, looking back at some of the things that I see in hindsight, I'm not sure if I said it earlier, but you go back to these images, but now 24 years later, I see great value in the way our company invested in our process and network. Because what I walked away with is if you have a core principle and a core expectation, and your customers match that quality service, then if you stay to that, you're just trying to develop that. And quality has, an A through Z list of sub-elements. But at the bottom of the line is one of the things we wanted to do is, listen, we want to do this right. And one of the key changes to that was, even if doing it twice makes it right. So, for example, when you talk about the network, when the force of those buildings, not just the two towers, but the associated buildings that we had to come down because of their structure, forced down onto that slur in Manhattan, it took centuries of ductwork and compressed it. So you have not just the perfect world that you've asked for your question on, is you have years and years of technology, of different construction methods, of building on top of old, and all this is all kind of compressed now. And so finding a good piece of underground cable, bringing it out of the ground and running it across the ground, up the side of the building, into a building to connect it, is one way of doing it. And we started to do that.
Okay.
Problem is, if you put too many cables on a building that's been structurally put in risk, what is the building going to do? So now you need a structural engineer to make sure that you bring the cables in and the weight to keep this.
Okay.
And then you go to the next step. Well, how many of those can we do? Okay, we can do X. Then which X are you going to do? And so you back into that 1,100 top 100 customers again, and you're trying to sort through. And the pressure is.
And you were talking about how the president set this goal to get Wall Street up and running, but then you also, all these I was looking at the list, like Morgan Stanley, American Express, Lehman Brothers, Bank of New York, Cantor Fitzgerald, Merrill Lynch. Those were kind of the big ones, but there were hundreds of companies that had to kind of resume operations in Connecticut or New Jersey or other parts of New York or someone even further. And you've got to reroute all that for them. And yet with this overarching goal of doing something for Wall Street that probably would have, under normal circumstances, months, right? Is the timeline, maybe even longer.
It could have, it actually, people think because we returned to a certain thing, it was years before New York had completed.
Okay.
And it's a function of all of those put together. And also the fact that if you do something temporarily so you can do something else, it's always with the goal of making it permanent and of the highest quality. So you have to go back and do rework.
Okay.
It's always built into your plan. Can't lose track of it, or else your network at the end game will be at risk.
Okay.
So that the weight of the analogy of the cables waiting, if you put them up, they've got to come down.
Sure.
They've got to go back in the second time, but this time you can't lose service.
Sure.
And so there's always the secondary. The easiest way for me to describe it would you imagine these pockets of back rooms. And in one room would be tracking the rework. I'll just label it that. Another would be tracking the plan B. What's the next phase? What's evaluated? Will it work? Won't it work? If it doesn't, what are we going to do? Another is vendor and sourcing coordination. You can't wait for something if you've got this much work in front of you.
Right.
And then, so one of the value investments that I saw was the strength of our technology was only as good as the training and the standards we had with our technicians.
Okay.
And the fact that they had been through years of doing this work, installing it and repairing it when we had failures, it was scale and the conditions, not the job. Okay. What you had to do is you had to release that you had trust that you trained them well enough. They had the right tools. You did everything you could to eliminate the roadblocks that would get in their way of completing the job, that you listened to their concerns, but you didn't let them get off plan.
Okay.
And you kept them safe. And if you zeroed in on that, you had to release the worry about, show me that you connected two wires, trust them they can do it.
Okay.
And they raised up. That becomes a bottom-up pressure for management at the lower and mid ranges, I think. Again, looking back, that they needed to get back up and really start thinking, planning, scheduling, coordinating to eliminate any productivity issue that would fall down at the critical element of fixing it.
Well, and it really challenges leadership when you had to pull techs. I mean, you had to go well beyond your New York team in order to accomplish this massive task. So you've got to go back to that base training that everybody company-wide has, whether they're in California or whether they're in New York. But then you're still under the management challenge of how do you make that a cohesive team in a highly stressful situation when people are also processing their own personal grief at the very site they're working. I mean, you were talking about the smells and just kind of that surreal feeling. So,
it's difficult to. There were spots of ultimate frustration and also amazement of accomplishment. Innovation I think some genius should sit down and write a book about innovation. Because some great new ideas came out, and sometimes they were old ideas that were dressed up and put into new technology, and they worked that you would have taken, But how do you build innovation into a standard way of doing business? And the key for me, again, looking back, is it sustainable?
Okay.
There are a lot of great ideas that solve today's problem and maybe even next week's problem, but can you sustain it, and will it apply to your entire network?
Okay.
So we looked at Manhattan and the urge of there's only so many people you could put to work in that one place. That became a natural way for us to be managed. You can't have people standing around just because they want to be close to where the images that they were seeing on TV are. So we were helped, if you want to use that word, by being able to be selective in where we put people and what they were doing in what order. Okay. And our network works through multiple departments. You have a customer who picks up a piece of device and sends a signal, and it goes out of their building into electronics, into the underground, into a conduit system. It might go through another 2 or 3 central offices. Then it goes to where they're trying to call, and it gets connected. But in the middle of that, you have 5 or 6 major departments that we have, because every unique piece has its own training site. So you got to coordinate the workforce. So if you're over doing A and the guy in the second office is over doing C, A and C aren't going to work together unless you schedule. So it tested our communication line. It tested our and I'm working around to your question. It tested our end-to-end scheduling and cycling and sourcing models so that they were forced, and they were modified using the internet for the first time. We were able. Remember, we're talking about 2001. We basically, people were still walking around with antennas off their phones. You're dealing with that, and you get to that picture, and innovation comes in where this is a great way to do interdepartmental scheduling, and let's make this a firm system, harden it, make it work, put disciplines around it. So that's how it blends back in. Those are innovations that become permanent. Innovations that are temporary are welcome as long as they're safe and concerned, and they can be mapped to that plan B.
Sure.
You got to undo it, because otherwise, the next time you have a disaster, you'll have so many patches that you can't make the network work.
Well, you mentioned patches because you said that when you guys kind of started, you were working with years and years and layers of different communication technology that had kind of been all piecemealed together over a decade or over a century. A long time. So you're trying to put the new on top of the old. And that was certainly a challenge.
Well, again, that's where, in a sense, every manager of every business should have some type of emergency restoration plan. Okay. And so and walk it through often enough that it's current. And when I say that is decisions were made to abandon repairable old technology. Key verb is repairable, and just flip it over into new.
Okay.
So there's a plus and minus. That decision model wasn't created in advance, but we were driven to it. We could fix old, piece part, or we could just say abandon, build new. And can we do that faster with new technology? And you get into that model.
How much of that, some of those decisions were pragmatic based on supply chain? Because you're working under September 11th, essentially, you weren't going to be getting a lot of, because it was a crime scene, rebuilding done. So you're compressed into like a 4 or 5 day window. So you've got to be bringing in, we talk about reconnecting 2 cables or 2 wires. Those physical assets have to be on site. So,
well, your timetable, you got the right number, but the timetable turns into first month.
Okay.
as compared to the first 4 months, as compared to a longer term, tightening up and finishing. And so you were talking about a month.
Okay.
And now you get back into bring Wall Street back on the 17th, where you can apply this model to it. And, data centers are now, some of them have been moved. So we're connecting new network to the old. When I say old, into new technology, connecting the rest of Wall Street. When you find those central spots, and again, to our technicians, high praise, it's not just good to get our two central offices talking to each other. We've got to get to the customer.
Sure.
So you got to identify each of those circuits that they want, where they want them, on what desk they want them, at what level of security, and et cetera, because they all have their own private networks, all designed differently in their own secure way.
Right.
Each one requires a unique interface.
Right.
For it to work to us. And each one of those things you can't manage from the top. You've got to count on your employees being able to understand the connection and the schedule and how it works. And so that multiplier for the over manager, the control freak, you're in trouble.
Okay. Yeah, because you can't possibly.
If you've trained your people well, and I might have been classified as a control freak, but
it's but it's okay. So you have to trust those folks to do what they need to do, and that's goes back to, it sounds like your training, that you've had your emergency preparedness plan in place. And it's funny because a lot of times employees kind of roll their eyes when the company's like, all right, we're going to go through this, fire drill, if you will, of this thing. But it sounds like because you at Verizon had done that, that was what you were able to lean on in those moments. Am I
over and over again? And honestly, you mentioned a key resource. There's no I, me, or my here, believe me, and I'm giving you a 24-year oversight. I wish I was this clear when I was there at the day. But I think when you think about our employees, I've talked about our vendors and our sourcing people had an amazing task. I mean, it's if we were planning a major, you're in Cincinnati, a major upgrade to your network, changing out your central office to new modern equipment for all the new services, that's planned for years because all these connections have to happen.
Right.
And the vendors have their purchase and sale process, and their equipment is all scheduled out for Cincinnati and Dallas and all these other places. And we pick up the phone and said, I need 4 central offices delivered to Manhattan tomorrow. So they have to turn around and said, well, Cincinnati, Dallas, and guess what? And you're in their whole change process is in place. The multiplier effect of all of this downstream is a heroic story all by itself of what the vendors had to do and how they delivered it and the way it was staged differently and then brought to the sites. The whole sourcing process could be, again, another great study.
You could write a whole book on that. Yeah.
And the impact it had. I'd like to think that some of the strengths that Verizon showed in accomplishing the mission are the same strengths that they had in doing theirs, because you have to have similar goals, similar standards, and the ability to respond to those things. It was a crazy, I think there are a lot of personal stuff that clicks in. I think one of the things are, and it happens over time, and this is a danger and a plus. My first image was you can't take your eyes off the site. No, so if you weren't there, it was on the radio or the TV, and it was 7x24, and you knew you were close enough to it. And keeping people's eye on the task is very difficult when eyes off the site.
Sure.
Then all of a sudden, that became for all levels. I think all levels of Verizon. You get tired, worn down, and that's when frustration set in. So being able to learn how to take that in the whole, when it was really your eyes on the site would drag you to to that bad place. But if you look at the eyes on the task, it was every day. And in a way, I think every level, including our most senior officers, had to manage down a level or two.
Okay.
Because of the magnitude. And by doing that, you had to get back into the mind. You can't just want something to happen. You have to fit in, where's the schedule, leap forward, oh, by the way, who's going to pay for this? How are we going to pay for, all of those things don't stop.
Yeah, this wasn't free. Yeah.
None of these things stop. And yes, insurance and all those, but at the time, you really want to make sure it's cared for.
It's interesting. You would have to, and it makes sense though, but there's such a challenging task that you almost had to put blinders on yourself and all your people, because not only are they they're getting inundated with information about the bigger scope of this attack, but also I'm sure all those people who were at the site were hearing from, spouses and friends and, what's going on. They wanted the update, and I would think you almost had to lock them out, right? Because I don't think you had the time for that.
Nope. And at the time, if you put family on the scorecard, I'm not sure it was always on everyone's personal scorecard, but the impact on the families of having employees on or near sites that were obviously going to be dangerous.
Sure.
Physically, potentially, and wearing safety equipment that we typically don't, and going to wash sites that they, would question, well, what are you doing when you're there? Even the technicians get wrapped up in the task. And they, instead of what the site is doing to them. So the post.
That's an interesting thing you mentioned, because to put on proper PPE can take even 30 minutes at the start of a shift when you're so naturally wanting to help and wanting to just dig into your job. So, but it sounds like you guys were able to kind of operationalize that's a part of this, because we don't want to just get Wall Street running and have you die of exposure 2 years from now. So
that was, you shouldn't say it was a decision, because it's obvious that we should do it.
Right.
Absolutely. But the urges and the tendencies and the wants, and do we really need to, and how quickly can I get out of it, and the limitations, all the human factors of I can do this my own way faster.
Right.
Are always there. But that's where, again, at certain times inside this model we have safety officers, and they become immediately in place promoted to chief operating officers, because if you have to, they're going to keep the discipline. That's their job. And they're placing the mind. They'll be dealing with all the OSHA and all those other people, and they'll be bringing back standards. And as things become safer, then we immediately make it safer and quicker for ourselves, gets productivity, if nothing else. But you always had that person sitting there. It's like talking to, I'm trying to think of another. There's probably a million examples. A lot of the ideas that were coming forward were to make things faster, but the simplest, I know, the simplest analogy is if you could picture in Manhattan someone getting up on a 28-foot ladder, and instead of moving it 1 foot because, that whole building's, crumbling and people are screaming, I'm going to reach.
Yeah, bad idea.
And like I almost can make it now, a little bit more, and you forget that the mom and the kids are at the bottom watching this. They're just not there.
Right.
That urge to do the job has to become sustained, and the big view, until you get this actual lesson, is the further you get away on a local level of that, you see how much time you save by doing it the right way. How much better the quality is because you're doing it the right way with all the equipment in front of you, proper. You're safe. It's done right. When you step back and look at that whole thing, it may not have worked because you didn't do it right. And then you have to say, well, what part? And then you say, well, what didn't they do? Well, they all reached. Now you get an entire network of people who are unsafe and reaching, not doing the right job. At the end of it, it's everyone fails. Yeah. It's a bigger concept that was business school kind of trained became real because the tendency is to keep your eyes on the site, not on the task. Okay. The urgency of what was around you and everything that was going on could bring in a mistake.
Sure. Was there a point where, like, as you went into the weekend with this looming Monday morning, ring the bell deadline, that you either thought, we're not going to make the deadline and we're going to have to tell the president and the nation we're not going to do it? Or was there a point where you thought, we've got this? Where was that kind of critical nexus, or did it go right up to the last seconds?
Yeah. That's probably confidential.
Okay.
Of course, I would sit there, sitting around now at the 99 having a beer with the other officers. What an awesome job we all did. But in fact, it took an awful lot of people, including the government and the customers out on Wall Street, to identify the critical circuits that they needed and where they needed them and when, and then to pull the resources that were doing other things together to make that happen. It took right up until the night before. I'll leave you with that.
Okay. So you were coming
for it to come back where it was going to work. And it was going to work not by just somebody reporting that it's fixed, that the lights were on and that, Wall Street traffic was moving. And then that became, and that was a big kudo for our company and for our employees. That again brings back to light that every day I can recall they were sitting, where are you? What's scheduled? What's at risk? What are the roadblocks that need to be removed? And at different levels, they were larger, prioritized.
Sure.
And then what was accomplished and more. And as we went on to this, more and more time was spent talking about what was accomplished, because that's the feedback that a lot of managers forget.
Sure.
You're on to the next problem. You never come back and recognize what was and wasn't done. Or people who made a mistake and they fixed it. You can't overreact to that. You got to go back and analyze it, fix it, square it away, and move forward again. It's just like managing the business. If you're running the coffee shop and one of your employees says, I just had an idea of it, and an easier way to do X, Y, and Z. Make this super duper froppy, whatever it is.
Right.
And you listen, you try it, and then you sit back and say, that would work. But boy, this can take me twice as long. And you say, well, can I charge more for it? Why? Because if the customer likes it, they'll pay for it.
Right.
And now do I want to make it my permanent product? Well, yeah, I do. Okay, so now I need another person to take the extra, the process.
Yeah.
These things are going through everybody's mind, and in a 9/11 situation and a local coffee shop. I mean, the most important people outside that whole site, quite honestly, were that I remember were the Red Cross people, the volunteers. Okay. They would wipe down your eyes and they would give you a cup of coffee 24 hours a day.
Wow.
Awesome. And you lose stress. You say, well, yeah, but that's their job. No, they were volunteers. These are people who are trained, equipped. I apply it now, looking back, to a lot of little things. That the ones that I would rate as highly successful were ones that Red Cross is a good example, that spent time to train their people, equip their people, what they were doing. They didn't go beyond. They didn't go into across the ribbons. They did their job.
So your kind of takeaway in leading in crisis management is make sure your people are trained up, give them the authority to do it, and then kind of celebrate that they have done.
Trained up is one thing, including management. And it's walk it through and practice it.
Okay. So practice makes perfect.
It was an amazing. I walked away with, and don't think you're. A lot of us came back. Everyone wants to know the story. You're right. What's the story? What's happening? What are you doing? What's the next Superman story? You can tell me.
Sure.
But really, it's just a matter of if people appreciate the part they play in something, and they do it well. That should be all. That's all you should do. I think trusting. You said trusting the handoff. If you're investing in training and development and customer care is your concern, and that is your business, because if they're not happy, no matter how well you recover, they're going to go to someone else.
Sure.
We better make sure that they're pleased, not just the president, but the end user. I think communications, that everybody uses that thing, but
sure.
I'm not sure it's always understood as an expectation. So I think if we were to do it over again, we would have built into the emergency plan going forward the upfront communication expectations, hourly, daily, monthly, not just what's next or what's wrong. It's what they've done and accomplished, and that was an aha going forward, I think.
Sure. So
anyway,
we're at this moment of Monday morning, and I was looking back on this, kind of revisiting it, and you had just on the floor of Wall Street, you had the governor, you had the Treasury Secretary, you had Mayor Giuliani, Senator Clinton. I mean, you had this enormous number of dignitaries, plus New York firefighters and police representatives, all there to ring the bell. And then there was 2 minutes of silence in memory of those lost. And I just wonder what was going through your mind during that last 5 minutes, because you still don't. I mean, you think it's going to work, but you're not sure. What are you thinking at that moment in those critical times with the entire nation watching, including the president and seemingly every American?
Well, number one, I wasn't in that room.
Okay, good.
But number two, I would tell you that because it worked the night before, I knew it would work.
Good. Well, that is awesome.
I mean, really, that's it. If somebody tripped over and pulled the plug by mistake, to me, that's the next problem to solve.
Sure.
But we knew it worked, and everybody did their job, and I was sure. So, but you never know.
Right.
Wow. Everybody wants to walk through the door, but you just don't always know what's on the other side. So if somebody what is this plug doing here, and just unplugged it, to me, that was just the next problem to solve. And if you're in a position as a leader and you're running around because it didn't work, screaming and yelling at people, then guess what everyone else will be doing?
Yep, you're right. Well, I want to thank you for sharing your insights today, but I also want to thank you as a citizen for this really was the first step in a very long process. And I don't know if we'll ever fully heal from such an event, but just that normalcy began to reemerge. And so for the part you played and for the people you worked with, I just want to say thank you. And we really appreciate it.
Yeah. And for all the employees of Verizon, because while we were all running around in the spotlight, the rest of the company did not stop, even though we took resources from all over the company. Yeah, it's a strong belief that if someone's looking for a career, it's a place to go.
Okay. Well, again, thank you. And thank you to all the people of Verizon, and job well done. Thanks, Glenn.
Thanks. Okay, Ben. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks for joining me today on the Super Pumped podcast. If you enjoyed today's show as much as I did, I have 3 quick next steps for you. First, subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube to make sure you don't miss future episodes. Next, leave me a review in your podcast app. And tell your friends about the show so others can find and benefit from the Super Pumped community. And finally, to put the ideas from today's show into action, visit us at superpumped.com to view the show notes, book a complimentary consultation, or take our free business launch readiness assessment. Keep well, and I'll see you next time.